Welcome, my bountiful friends. Welcome to part 2 of the Philip K. Dick Deep Dive. Hopefully you will already have watched the first episode, and if you haven't, then I suggest you go back and start with that one. Because in this one, we're going to be taking a look at his significant works, the style and atmosphere of his writing, the themes, and the critical reception and legacy. And then I'm going to give my own personal thoughts right at the end. So without further ado, let's begin. PKD had a number of major successes, both during his lifetime and posthumously, and both via his novels and predominantly through film adaptations and TV shows as well. But I'm going to primarily focus on the literature. I've already mentioned several of his big hits during the previous section, but let's now take a closer look. So, as stated, his first major success was The Man in the High Castle, which presents itself as a highly interesting what-if scenario where the Allies have actually lost World War II and the American mainland is now occupied half by Nazi Germany and the other half by Imperial Japan, and there's a buffer zone in the Rocky Mountain region which separates them, and there's a mysterious writer who is the eponymous Man in the High Castle, who is actually a version of Philip K. Dick himself. And that's no coincidence, because a lot of people don't realise that he had allegedly a paranormal experience in which he slipped into an alternative timeline where this alternate reality was the reality. But yeah, if someone's unaware of that, then this presents itself just as a really good sort of espionage thriller set into a near future as well, so it wasn't even contemporary of the time when it was written. So his next big hit was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I've already produced a separate video on that. In fact, it was my first one. This one came in 1968, and obviously it was the one that eventually broke him through into mainstream culture via the Ridley Scott film. But there is quite a difference between the two. But yeah, the novel has a much more bureaucratic Descartes, who is contrasted against the androids who he is hunting, and the book basically says that they are more human than he is, and it poses the question of actually who's more real, the artificial humans or the organic humans. But yeah, again, it's a good cat and mouse story. He followed this book up with Ubik, which is many a fan's favourite. It's another story that questions the very nature of reality, but this time it drags in the afterlife to further bake the reader's mind. The protagonists in this flip between false realities, and it's up to us in the end to work out what's occurred and which reality is which. And bizarrely, this book has not been adapted, although there are tons of films out there that pretty much use the same plot twist. The next significant and highly successful novel was published after his death, and is one that tells us the most about him as a human being. I speak, of course, about A Scanner Darkly, which tells the tale of an undercover narcotics officer who has infiltrated the local drug scene. It's significant for being a near-future novel with very few futuristic aspects. So it has very much a Black Mirror tone to it, where one's personal identity is brought under question. And of course this was adapted into a very good Richard Linklater film. And the last most significant book is arguably the most interesting, and it's 1981's Valis, which features a fictionalised version of Dick called Horse Lover Fat as the protagonist. So why such an odd sounding name? Well, it's because Philip is derived from the ancient Greek name Philippos, which meant horse lover, and Dick means fat in German. So Valis is a slightly fictionalised account of PKD's own metaphysical experiences with the Valis intelligence that he believed was a conduit of source intelligence, better known as God. He believed he was being communicated with by this entity via a pink laser beam. Other honourable mentions are the splendidly entitled Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldridge, which also features drugs and altered realities on Mars. Noting here that the Red Planet is also a frequent backdrop to his novels. So if you're not in San Fran, then you're probably going to be on the Red Planet. And then there's the equally awesome named Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, which is about a protagonist who slips into an alternative totalitarian timeline. So again, we have another timeline. So we can see that certain devices are being used over and over, but with slightly different twists each time. PKD's prose was surprisingly crisp and clean, very straightforward with very little adornment, and often carried a sense of unease and disorientation that mirrors the fragmented realities he depicts. His ability to blend the mundane trivialities of everyday life with extraordinary existential shocks created a unique narrative texture which draws readers into worlds while always keeping them questioning the direction of his plot and the nature of the reality that the book's actually set in. His style is characterised by its clarity and accessibility. He often wrote in a plain conversational tone, making complex ideas quite approachable. Dialogue is often realistic and sharp, capturing the nuances of human interaction and the underlying psychology of relationships, was another big thing for him. Beneath the surface simplicity lies a profound depth. There's abrupt shifts in perspective, fragmented timelines, and unreliable narrators to reflect the instability of the characters' realities. The atmosphere is often one of paranoia, uncertainty, and existential dread. His settings, whether they be futuristic cities, dystopian societies, or alternative histories, are meticulously crafted to evoke a sense of unease. His worlds are populated by characters who are often ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, grappling with questions of identity, morality, and the nature of their reality. A recurring element in the atmosphere is the blurring of polarised boundaries, for example between human and machine, reality and illusion, and sanity and madness. This thematic ambiguity is reflected in the physical and emotional landscape of his stories. For example, in Ubik, the characters navigate a reality that is constantly shifting, with objects and environments regressing to earlier states of existence. This creates a disorientating and claustrophobic atmosphere that mirrors the character's inner psychological turmoil. His use of setting also contributes to the atmosphere of his works. He often chooses familiar contemporary locations such as California, particularly obviously as mentioned San Francisco, and he infuses them with futuristic or dystopian elements. This juxtaposition of the familiar and the alien element out of place creates a sense of unease and makes his speculative worlds feel eerily plausible. Despite the often bleak and unsettling nature of many of his stories, they are often imbued with a deep sense of humanity. His characters are mostly flawed and vulnerable everyman individuals who suddenly find themselves at odds with the system that they have spent their entire lives within and served. Paranoia and pursuit often follows, along with a sense of dread. The characters' ordinariness resonates with readers on an emotional and logical level. Their struggles with identity, love, and loss are universal, even as they navigate the most surreal and fantastical scenario imaginable. It could just as easily be our struggles. PKD's novels are renowned for their exploration of profound and often unsettling themes, which delve into the nature of reality, identity, and humanity. His works nearly always challenge readers to question their perceptions and confront existential dilemmas. One of the central themes of his novels is the nature of reality itself. We take our everyday reality for granted, but central to the majority of his novels is a protagonist who finds that their world has shifted, or else they stumble across an uncomfortable truth that reframes their perceptions and beliefs. There is often a frequent and sudden blurring of the line between what is real and what is illusion that the reader is invited to decipher for themselves before a big reveal at the end. 4 classic examples that best typify this thematic format are Time Out of Joint, The Penultimate Truth, Ubik, and A Maze from Death. In 1959's Time Out of Joint, the protagonist is a man living what seems to be a typical 1950s American town life. However, he begins noticing strange occurrences, and as he investigates, he discovers that his entire world is an artificial construct designed to keep him unaware of a larger truth. This one is sort of a Truman Show before its time. The novel plays with the idea of manipulated reality and hidden forces controlling perception. In 1964's The Penultimate Truth, most of humanity is living underground in a dystopian future, believing that World War III is still raging above them. In reality, the war ended long ago, and the surface is now controlled by an elite ruling class who perpetuate the illusion to maintain their power. In 69's Ubik, which we slightly covered before, reality itself becomes unstable and characters struggle to discern the truth amidst a cascade of increasingly more surreal events, because they are all in fact dead and in stasis. And in 1970's A Maze of Death, the protagonists are seemingly space explorers on an alien planet, but in reality they are shown that to be mental patients receiving treatment via VR. Another recurring theme is identity and consciousness. Characters often face a crisis of identity, questioning who they are, what they serve, and whether their memories or perceptions can be trusted. This theme is most vividly portrayed in A Scanner Darkly, where the protagonist's mind splits due to drug psychosis, and he ends up narking on himself to the authorities as if he's a third person. The exploration of identity extends to the concept of artificial intelligence and androids, as seen in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, where the boundaries between human and machine blur, and the latter exhibit more humanity than the self-serving humans. In 1964's The Simulacra, we have a president who has been replaced by an android. In fact, androids are a frequent feature in many of his novels. Mental health also forms part of the identity theme, and is perhaps best exemplified by Clans of the Alphane Moon, in which individual groups are put together to form clans based on the nature of their own mental disorders. All of PKD's novels invite the reader to reconsider the nature of identity and perception, including one's own. Nearly all his works feature a backdrop of paranoia and authoritarianism, and features technology and its impacts on humanity. Many of his novels depict dystopian societies which are suppressed and controlled by fearsome technologies that are utilised by oppressive regimes or corporations. This reflects his concerns about the erosion of individual freedoms and the safety of democracies. As we can see, this man was well ahead of his time and able to foresee the future progress or lack thereof of humanity. While all the other themes are easily relatable, perhaps his most intriguing recurring theme is that of alternative timelines. He believed that we all actually live in a variable quantum reality where different paths can be taken or experienced. As already mentioned, from PKD's perspective, The Man in the High Castle, an alternative history novel where characters navigate a world dominated by fascist powers, was actually based on a world he temporarily experienced. Similarly, in Flow My Tears, the Policeman said, we have a protagonist who accidentally finds himself in a whole lot of authoritarian trouble when he inadvertently slips into another timeline via use of a drug. During his infamous Metz conference, PKD advised everyone to be grateful for the timeline they were currently in, saying, if you think this reality is bad, then you should see some of the other ones. And I highly recommend that you go and watch his Metz conference, and in fact I'll include a link in the description. And the theme tying all the other themes together? Well, it's religion and spirituality. Due to his experiences with Valis, all his work from the mid-70s had some concern with theology, although there is a hint of it throughout all his work, even prior. But it's not uncommon for all matters concerning shifting realities, people's true identities, and oppressive regimes of darkness to ultimately reduce to being acts of God, or else influenced by God. To experience this element at its most potent, we have Valis, The Divine Invasion, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, and Radio Free Albemuth. These novels explore the nature of divinity, the existence of a higher power, and the quest for a transcendence. His own mystical experiences add layers of metaphysical complexity and psychological questing into all his narratives. All his novels are a tapestry of thought-provoking themes that continue to resonate with readers, offering a unique lens through which to examine the complexities of existence, reality, and humanity. And he only keeps on getting more and more relevant each and every year. His novels have undergone a significant transformation in critical reception, evolving from relative obscurity to widespread recognition as some of the most influential works in science fiction, largely stemming from literary awards and numerous film and TV adaptations. During his early career in the 50s and 60s, he was primarily known within the science fiction community, which was hitting its peak in these decades, with the likes of Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert Heinlein, among many, many others. His work was often dismissed by mainstream literary critics. His novels were recognised for their originality, yet they struggled to gain serious academic attention despite, or perhaps because of, their metaphysical and weird undertones. Science fiction suffered, and still does to a certain extent, from exactly the same literary snobbery that horror is often subjected to, being largely viewed and dismissed as pulp entertainment rather than as legitimate literary genre. And his unconventional storytelling, marked by paranoia, shifting realities, and a deep distrust of authority, was often misunderstood or just plain shunned. Despite this, he still managed to gain a steady, loyal following among science fiction readers, and his work was praised by fellow writers who recognised its depth and originality. And while he did manage to win the Hugo Award in '63, which marked a significant milestone in his career, many of his novels were published by small presses and did not achieve any commercial success. His themes of identity, reality, manipulation and authoritarianism resonated deeply with the academically adept counterculture movements that were highly active at this time. But mainstream society largely ignored him, simply finding his works too weird and unrelatable. Following his death, his reputation grew significantly, which is just typical, to be honest, for writers. It was fueled largely by the adaptation of Du Android's Dream of Electric Sheep into Blade Runner in '82. The film introduced his themes to a broader audience who were more readily able to buy into its too cool for school cyberpunk wrapping. This was further reinforced by Paul Verhoeven's brilliantly madcap 1990 Schwarzenegger film Total Recall, which was loosely based on the short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. By the late 90s and early 2000s, his presence was further boosted in the common consciousness by even more film and TV adaptations. As society burned through all the obvious sci-fi tropes during the 60s and 70s, it sought new innovations and aesthetics, and that naturally brought them to the weird world of PKD and his oeuvre. The glut of YouTube videos about him and his writing testifies to his finally and belatedly entering into the mainstream. I was first introduced to PKD by my best friend back in college. Oddly enough, he gave me some of his non-sci-fi works first, perhaps to introduce me softly into his sphere of thinking. The first books I read were The Broken Bubble, in Milton Lumpkey territory, and the superbly named Confessions of a Crap Artist. And they were solid enough, and still possessed his trademark quirk. And even though there were no false realities or aliens in sight, there was still psychological confusion and catharsis in the face of existential dread, or via the dark night of the soul. I went on to read all the other novels, and in no particular order. I think The Zap Gun, Now Wait for Last Year, and Martian Timeslip were among the first few. What struck me most was the clear divergence from standard sci-fi tropes. In his novels, aliens were odd and mysterious forces of vague and often existential and/or reality-bending intention, and not the usual evil invading force that humans must unite and best. Even in Our Friends from Frolix 8, which does indeed feature an alien force invading and conquering the Earth, it's being done to bring down the evil human regime that has been brutally controlling humanity via unethical means. Then there's the massive melodramatic male and female romantic relationships that sit front and central in nearly all of his stories. They feel very much like a projection of his own numerous troubled relationships. And let's face it, they probably were. And in fact, I also got the impression, yet again a parallel to Lovecraft, that I was reading the same basic novel again and again. The same fundamental story of the archetype everyman, who was in fact half PKD himself, struggling in a relationship that has run its course, only to find a new, younger love that reinvigorates him, and all the while battling the authorities against some gigantic reality-changing event which then occurs. It was as if he was perpetually striving to construct the perfect novel. But perhaps there's deeper symbolism here. When my friend told me all the weird and wacky events involving PKD's life, including the pink lasers, God talking to him through his TV, and Valis, I just figured his mind was addled from decades of habitual and heavy speed use. Now that I'm older and I've started to question things that I took for granted as a youth, I was shocked to discover that there is, at the very least, elements of truth concerning the nature of reality. Things that are even being hinted at now in quantum physics. While Lovecraft was unwittingly mapping the astral realms, PKD was unconsciously tapping into the pulse of consciousness, and that in fact his works are inward-looking recursive fractals of humanity, identity, authority, control, and that which lies hidden at the very heart of it all. His work remains largely the same throughout because the fundamental truth about the nature of reality remains the same and unchanging. So what are your thoughts on PKD's writings? Which of his novels did you find the most compelling? Which of his protagonists or antagonists did you like the most? And which of his plot twists surprised you? If you could hit that like, subscribe and bell icon for more deep dives into the world of literature, then I would be most grateful. Until next time, keep reading and remember, if the world around you suddenly shifts or an assassin from the future attempts to end your life while you're going about your mundane business, then you've probably silently switched timelines and are currently in a dystopia or an artificial reality. But then again, it's so hard to tell these days. In the meantime, let me leave you with these words. What does a scanner see? Into the head? Down into the heart? Does it see into me? Into us? Clearly or darkly? Goodbye.